What follows is an old saw. There once was an extraordinarily wealthy individual who decided to throw a great party. The feast consisted of good foods, lively entertainment, and enjoyable music. It seemed to have everything. And the most notable thing about this feast is that only the workers, the farmers, and the sharecroppers of the town were invited. As these workers were partaking in the merriment, a traveler from a distant town happened to be passing through. He caught a glimpse of the great feast, and he was astounded. What has happened to this wealthy fellow? Why is he according such a high honor to a group of villagers, farmers, and sharecroppers? It appears he forgot to invite the city's most respectable citizens. The attendees of the party were equally perplexed. "Well, it seems the tables have turned," said one worker to the other. "After toiling away all of these years, we have finally been given our due." Her companion added, "Indeed, our host does us great honor by inviting those who work the hardest and have the least, rather than those who sit at the top." In the minds of these lowly villagers, in the matter of a couple of hours, the reputation of their host as a man of considerable generosity and even subversive justice was firmly established. Meanwhile, in a field several miles off, another group of workers had been set to a task. They were creating a party that was twice as elaborate as the first. Finer foods, livelier entertainment, and better music were all being coordinated in this place. Only a handful of the host's most trusted friends saw both of the great feasts. And after some hemming and hawing, they decided to ask him the purpose of throwing both of these parties. "Oh, that's easy," said the wealthy host. "Tomorrow is my son's wedding, and it would not be fitting to have these poor villagers seen at such an event. The first party is meant only to distract them. It's a ruse." And indeed, the wedding was even better than anyone could have imagined, certainly better than any poor villager could ever have dreamt of attending. So ends the story. Now, the meaning of this parable is up for debate. Rabbi Israel Bronstein interprets this parable to mean something that was surprising to me when I read it. He interprets this parable to mean that the wicked may prosper in this life, but the reward of the righteous will be waiting in the next. I was really surprised to read his interpretation, because that is not at all what I got from the story. Rather than a commentary on the reward of righteousness in a future life, I took the story to be more a critique of duplicitous behavior and ulterior motives. It seems to say, watch out for the motives of those who would do you good. Their intentions may not always be what they seem. There is a Peanuts episode that gets at this point. Now, Peanuts is one of my favorite cartoons, and it would be hard for me to think of a holiday from my childhood without also thinking of the accompanying Peanuts special. I mean, who can forget the Great Pumpkin from the Halloween special of Peanuts? But another of my favorites, besides the Great Pumpkin, is the Valentine's Day special. Now, in this episode, everyone is supposed to come to class and give out Valentine's cards to their classmates. The poor, hapless Charlie Brown does not receive a single Valentine card from his classmates. And what seems to add insult to injury is that when the other characters realize that no one has given him a card, they cross out the name on one of their cards and write his name in. It is hard to imagine anything sadder than receiving a card that has another name crossed out on it and yours written in. Poor Charlie Brown ends up walking home with an armful of these afterthought cards, and he does accept them as a consolation, but at the end of the day, I think it's still sad. The motivating intention of his classmates was pity, not kindness or genuine care. Intention means a lot. If the intention of an act is that someone wants to do something kind for us, we can feel particularly good. I remember when my friend's adoption came through. It was 3 weeks before we were supposed to graduate seminary, and she was completely overwhelmed. I can't even hold Tim and study at the same time. How am I going to get all of this schoolwork done? So 2 other friends and I showed up the next day. One of us drilled her on Greek vocabulary words while she played with her baby. I took dictation for her final paper in constructive theology, and she wrote the whole thing while rocking Tim while he was asleep. And her other friend had the most important job. She brought Starbucks. I just feel really warm inside, she said. I can't believe that you guys showed up for me like this. She said that as we were wrapping things up. And indeed, genuine kindness can feel better than many of the other things in our life. But when that intention is tarnished by ulterior motives or falsity, not much can feel worse. Such fake kindness is a ubiquitous thing, though. All of us have probably experienced it at some time or another when someone's intentions did not match up with what he or she was communicating to us. This week, I went online to see if others have written about the phenomenon of ulterior motives. And as it turns out, many psychologists have done research into trying to understand them. Now, much of this research is geared specifically towards what they call ingratiating behavior. In other words, behavior where people are nice in order to manipulate or get something in return. As Dr. Susan Krauss puts it, the crux of the problem with ingratiation is that the person's behavior is by definition both self-serving and insincere. Wanting something out of you, the person may do favors, put on a false front of friendship, or flatter you by making up phony compliments. All of this makes you feel uncomfortable because there's still a slight possibility that the efforts are genuine. You want to help someone who is truly in need, but if it feels like you're being manipulated, helping that person is probably the last thing that you'll want to do. So ends the quote. So how good are we at spotting this behavior? Well, Krauss goes on to talk about a Cal State experiment, which gets at this question in a roundabout way. The experiment discovered that test subjects are far more willing to think that they are able to spot ulterior motives than others are. In other words, we view ourselves as particularly smart about picking out ingratiating behavior and false motives, and we tend to think that other people are especially gullible. And the truth lies somewhere in the middle, at least according to the researchers. So it can be difficult to sort out genuine from disingenuous motives, at least when people are determined to hide them. Even if it's hard to sort out the true motives of others, it can be helpful to work it out for ourselves. What are our motives in a particular situation? A friend of mine tells a story about how she left her hometown in order to go to graduate school for social work. She was working for a nonprofit, one whose mission that she wholeheartedly believed in. It helped children who were disadvantaged find the resources they would need in order to succeed in school. Now, many of the people who worked at this nonprofit were poor students themselves and therefore in need of transportation. As my friend was about to move, she made up her mind. She decided to donate her car to this nonprofit. It was an older vehicle, but it ran well enough, and she would not need it when she got to graduate school in a big city with lots of public transportation. Her supervisor was enthusiastic. In fact, he was so grateful that he found a couple of $100s in the budget to give to my friend in exchange for the car. I know it isn't much, but this car is really going to help us, and I want to do something in return. It seemed like a win-win, and my friend gratefully accepted the money. But looking back on the situation, she realizes that she made a mistake. Accepting the money complicated my intentions, she said. I wanted to give them something because I cared about what they were doing. Instead, I accepted payment for it, which made it an exchange of goods. It's not that my friend lost sleep over this, or that she thinks that she's a bad person for accepting the cash, but she does wish that she had sorted out her true intention, figured out what that was, which was to offer a gift, and then stuck with it. It would have been a lot clearer what she was doing in that situation. Finding pure intentions, whether it's our own or others, it's difficult business. Some believe that it's pretty much impossible, sort of akin to the search for the philosopher's stone or the illusory chimera. These people say behavior is essentially self-serving, and it's pretty much impossible to find a positive or good intention that we might have. But I'm not in that camp. Indeed, I've seen many, many kind acts where genuine care is expressed. I can just think of all of the times in the last several months that our congregation has showed up for those who are vulnerable and in need. The Interfaith Peace Ring around the Muslim Community Center, the Rally for Love, tomorrow's Rally for Solidarity with transgender students at Las Positas. All of these are places that I have been inspired by authentic acts of generosity and kindness. And then, of course, our community also shows up for each other in our times of need and vulnerability. I think our congregation is a place where genuine kindness, compassion, and care can be expressed. Now, maybe what I'm about to say is a little bit of an ulterior motive that I have for preaching this sermon. So I hope it doesn't tarnish the rest of the sermon, but at least I'm going to admit that I have this ulterior motive, and it's also a motive that I genuinely believe in. We are at the tail end of completing our pledge campaign. And if you have not gotten your pledge card filled out, I would encourage you to do that. We are at about $180,000 or $90,000, and we're 80% done with our pledge drive, so we are getting there, and we're getting close to our goal. And pledging for next year is what's going to allow us to continue our work to create the beloved, generous community in the world that we want to see. It's one more way that we can realize our intentions for kindness in the world. And if that kindness is our intention, then I have every belief that it will spread and make a difference. I'm going to end with a story from the Buddhist tradition that talks a little bit about this. A great king invited the Buddha to preach and offered a token of his piety as several hundred thousands of lamps. At the time, an old woman who had been begging and had only managed to collect 2 coins bought some oil with them and offered it all in a small lamp to the Buddha. With this offering, she prayed to eliminate the darkness of the sufferings of all living beings. By the next morning, the many lamps the hundreds of thousands of lamps that had been offered by the king had already burned themselves out. But the lamp of the poor old woman was still burning. Several of the Buddha's monks went to behold it, and the most senior of them thought to extinguish it. He tried to blow it out, but every time it blew out, it was like one of those birthday candles, that like pop back into light. And then he tried to pour sand on top of it, but every time he, pulled the sand off of it, the flame was still lit. It would just pop back into light. And then buckets of water were brought by the monks, one after another, to try to eliminate the light of that lamp. Just then the Buddha came by. "What are you trying to do?" he asked. "Well, we're trying to extinguish this lamp, but it continues to burn." "Ah," said the Buddha, "you wish to extinguish that lamp? That lamp cannot be extinguished, not with the winds from the seven corners of the world, nor with the stones of every mountain that would try to bury it, not with the last drop of water poured on it from every ocean. It was lit with the purest intention of kindness and compassion, and that light can do nothing else but be carried out into the world." May our pure intentions of kindness and compassion now be carried out into the world. Amen, and blessed be.